Investigators in Canada are on the trail of a killer. The key lies in the victim's cells. But has fire destroyed all the evidence? At a murder scene, a handful of cigarettes provides the only clue. Will forensic detectives be able to unlock their secret? This young man was imprisoned for a rape he swears he didn't commit. Can science prove he's innocent? When police are stumped, they may turn to detectives in lab coats to uncover clues hidden inside the human cell. One strand of DNA can finger a killer or set the innocent free. The new shape of crime detection is a double helix. In July 1991, a janitor in Vancouver, British Columbia made a routine trip to the dumpster. But what he found was far from routine. Inside lay a body burned so completely he wasn't sure it was human. He ran to call police. Across town, detectives Al Catley and Rick Crook responded to the call. The homicide investigators had done this drill before. What may look like a human body sometimes turns out to be a practical joke, a discarded mannequin, or some other case of mistaken identity. They hoped that was all it was. Still, they had to check it out.
So when we walked over to take a look at inside the dumpster, there was just the outline of a human body. And in fact, it was so badly destroyed by the fire that it was questionable as to whether it was human, or we've had some instances of bear carcasses being destroyed after illegal hunting or something like that. And we didn't rule out that possibility.
You can't.
No.
The thing is, though,
The officers approached the dumpster carefully, making note of details that could become important later. The dumpster was cool to the touch when they arrived. The fire had been out for hours. A stain spread from the corner onto the pavement. Whoever set the blaze used more than enough flammable liquid to destroy the contents. A close inspection of the contents confirmed that this was no false alarm. There, amid the ashes of computer boxes, wooden flats, and scrap paper, lay a human body. After the detectives made their notes, the delicate removal of the fragile evidence began. It was gently placed in a body bag so as not to damage it any further. Then it went to the morgue, where a pathologist would examine the body for clues to its identity. Anything else that survived the blaze was also collected and sealed.
not surprising.
Surveying the scene, the detectives realized the murderer selected his site carefully. An industrial park closed for the weekend, surrounded by brush and trees.
In fact, we did establish that people were driving by roughly the time that we think that the homicide occurred, or the burning occurred, and there wasn't anything. You could have quite easily have driven up here and probably out without really seeing what you would have thought was a fire.
Homicides are often solved in the first 24 hours when investigators follow hot leads. But in this case, the fire had gone out. The trail had grown cold. If the murder happened just 5 years earlier, Crook and Catley would have relied solely on hunches and their talent for bulldogging a case until they had the answers. But by 1991, when this victim died, Crook and Catley knew they had an ally in the lab. A powerful new tool had been added to crime solving: DNA profiling. investigators no longer needed a shred of evidence to solve a case. They only needed a single cell. As personal as the whorls and lines of a fingerprint, but far more difficult to hide, DNA is the next wave in scientific sleuthing. Today, scientists can extract DNA on a sweat-stained hat left by a nervous killer, from saliva on the stamp of an extortionist's letter, or from dried blood or skin scraped from underneath a victim's fingernails. Microscopic evidence has always been left behind by criminals. Only with the advent of DNA profiling has it become incriminating. DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, contains every detail that makes you human.
Back to where it was.
No two people, except identical twins, share the same patterns. DNA is small enough to fit inside the nucleus of every cell. Its shape is a double helix, like a spiral staircase wrapped around a column. Uncoiled, the double helix would stretch to 8 feet. About 99.5% of everyone's DNA is the same, but some sections vary greatly from person to person. By studying those sections, scientists can identify victims and unmask murderers. In the Virginia Division of Forensic Science in Richmond, Paul Ferrara runs one of the most progressive DNA testing labs in the country.
With the sensitivity of this technology, I don't know that I could go in and commit a violent crime and just not somehow leave something of me behind. And that's all it takes with this technology, just some little piece of me that's got a cell with a nucleus in it, and I'm in deep trouble.
Heat is the enemy of DNA, and fire is the bane of forensic investigators who try to recover DNA from torched crime scenes. A week after the victim was found, Crook and firefighters recreated the inferno to see if it could shed some light on the crime. Whether by design or accident, the killer left one lid open, creating a downdraft inside the dumpster. The rushing air whipped the flames into a frenzy. The surrounding trees hid what little smoke the fire produced. It burned at about 2,000 degrees for 30 to 40 minutes. By comparison, a crematorium burns between 1,000 to 1,400 degrees for about 3 hours. Police were lucky to have any remains at all. Now they had to figure out who was killed here. All the pathologist could tell them was that the victim was a white female. Traditional methods at a standstill, detectives focused on X-rays. They showed the victim was shot in the head, but they also revealed a feature detectives hoped would identify her. David Sweet, a forensic odontologist or dental investigator, worked on the case. Teeth are the hardest substance in the human body and the most difficult to destroy. When bodies can't be easily identified, odontologists look to the teeth to tell them about the victim. Their wear and condition can hold the story of a person's life, whether they were right or left-handed, drank water with fluoride as a child, or wore braces. By studying the victim's teeth, it was determined that she was in her early 20s. She had one extraordinary feature.
But the other thing that we realized when we examined the teeth was there was an extra tooth right in the center of the upper jaw between the upper central incisors. And those showed up very well in the x-rays that were taken after the victim died.
Crook ran a computer search that compared his findings with dental records of missing persons. None matched. Despite his best efforts, Crook was stymied. He still had a victim without a name and a murder without a suspect. Meanwhile, somewhere out there, a killer ran free, confident nothing could link him to his crime. What he didn't know was that a small piece of evidence could provide the missing link.
That looks great.
Oh, you cheated.
For 2 days, Detective Al Catley chased a ghost.
Good, good. And yourself?
Who was the woman in the
Karen, I'll tell you
dumpster?
what we had.
What awful chain of events led to her murder? Surely by now someone, a friend, a lover, a co-worker, was missing her. Catley asked his staff for missing persons reports. One stood out. Lynn Breeden, age 30. Her roommate filed the report. He had dropped her off at a friend's house. The friend saw her leaving a nightclub around 3 a.m. the night before the burned woman was found. She left with an unknown man. 3 days later, a woman posing as Lynn Breeden tried to empty her bank account. The woman presented a withdrawal slip with Breeden's account number.
Hi, I need to make a withdrawal.
Okay.
The teller knew she wasn't who she claimed to be. When she questioned the imposter,
And
the
she's
woman
been out of
became
town.
flustered.
She asked me just to withdraw some money so I could pay some bills for her. But I did.
When the teller tried to detain the woman, she hurried out.
No, I need you to stay here.
Wait, I gotta go.
No, I need you to stay here.
A security camera captured the failed transaction. Analysis of the film revealed a man waiting for the woman in the parking lot. Police made a photo of the woman from the tape and ran it in the newspaper. She was identified and called in for questioning. She told police a friend had offered her $500 to scam the bank. She knew nothing of the murder. The friend was Chris Cruz, an exotic dancer who used the stage name Tony Devons. Detectives placed him under constant surveillance, then asked him to come in to speak with police.
Homicide squad.
Not realizing police were watching him, Cruz parked his car 2 blocks from the station and walked the rest of the way.
Serious criminal matter.
The surveillance officers called Sergeant Crook to tell him they thought Cruz must be hiding something in his car.
In the 400 block Main Street.
When Cruz arrived at the station, police asked if they could search his car. He told them the car was at his parents' in another county.
You do have the keys and I want them.
They knew he was lying. They told him they knew where he parked it, and they didn't need his permission to search it. Reluctantly, he handed over the keys. Forensic investigators took pictures of the car from every angle, carefully recording what they saw before touching it. They moved in closer to gather more evidence, collecting and photographing virtually everything. It was too soon to tell what might be important later. The men worked in teams. Some officers inspected the evidence, while others marked where it was found. Investigators found bloodstains on the sides and rear of the car. They marked the positions carefully. Later, the shape of the stains would be analyzed to calculate what direction the blood came from and its point of origin. These details are crucial for reconstructing a crime. Blood samples may also be collected for DNA analysis. Police searched the car inside and out. They looked through personal items in the back seat, hoping to find any piece of evidence to tie the victim to the car.
All right, it's 10:05. We're going into the trunk.
Next, they opened the trunk.
Oh, look at this right off the bat.
Inside, they found a gas can and other objects covered with blood.
Get a shot. One moment.
Beneath some clothing, they found several key pieces of evidence: a bloody tire iron and a .22 caliber rifle.
I'd say that's the
The
deal.
detectives now were almost certain Cruz killed Lynn Breeden. but they had no way of connecting the suspect to the victim. Cruz denied knowing her. He told friends he bought her identification on the black market, and police couldn't prove the blood on the car was hers. They needed to compare the DNA from the blood on the car to DNA from the victim. But where could they find the victim's DNA? They turned to David Sweet for help. He suggested looking for it in her impacted wisdom teeth. No one had ever tried it before, but it was their last hope.
We know theoretically that there are cells still embedded in the mineral tissues of the teeth, and we should be able to open the teeth, extract those cellular materials, and extract the DNA from the cells, and then process it in a forensic DNA analysis.
A tooth is an armor coating that surrounds a core of living tissue. Sweet hoped the tissue within the impacted wisdom teeth were protected from the fire by the thick jawbones surrounding them. He cut the first wisdom tooth from crown to root, but found no tissue inside. His second attempt was more successful. He found tissue, but he didn't know if its DNA was destroyed by the fire. He sent it to the lab to be tested. All he could do was wait.
Okay.
Did Chris Cruz kill Lynn Breeden? The answer was in a forensic lab in Vancouver, where the victim's tissue was sent for testing. Finally, Dr. Sweet received the results. The DNA survived the fire. What's more, further testing showed the DNA from the victim matched the DNA from the blood in Cruz's car. The lab calculated the odds that it wasn't the victim's blood were 1 in 540 million. Dr. Sweet proved that Lynn Breeden was in the car the night she died. Confronted with the overwhelming evidence, Chris Cruz confessed to murder. Based on interviews, detectives pieced together a likely scenario of that fatal night. Breeden once borrowed a great deal of money from Cruz. Now he wanted to collect. Breeden refused to pay him. Cruz lost his temper. Growing impatient, she got out of his car. Cruz beat her, shoved her body in the trunk, and drove to the dumpster. After he arrived at the secluded spot, the victim began to regain consciousness. Chris Cruz shot her. He thought the flames would erase all the evidence. How could he know the charge of murder would come from his victim's own mouth? Found guilty of second-degree murder, Chris Cruz received a life sentence. In rural Clay County, Alabama, a drive along Route 31 leads to a town caught between memories and progress, where turn-of-the-century storefronts share billing with a new city hall, where folks still get their news word of mouth, and where bad news and good news travel at about the same speed. Summertime slow. It's a safe place where parents don't think twice about giving their teenagers free rein to explore the land. A place where violence is an unwelcome stranger. On July 22, 1995, 3 riders on all-terrain vehicles discovered a burned mattress in the woods, and beneath it, what appeared to be blackened bones. They contacted Sheriff Ralph Toland, who responded to the call.
You think you've got a body? 3 miles. 3 miles east of 4977 intersection. Okay, we'll be on our way.
The men met the sheriff and led him to their grim discovery. It looked like murder. Toland began to secure the crime scene, but knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed to be sure no evidence was jeopardized.
I got down into the scene and I saw exactly what had happened. Saw the mattress charred and burned, nothing left but the springs over a skeleton. I just stopped everybody where they were at and told them to stop right there. Had them to go back out to the entrance from the road and ask them all just to secure it. I wanted forensic and the criminalist to come and help us collect all the evidence.
The man he wanted was Angelo Dellamana. A scientist with the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences, Dellamana never knows what he's going to find when he answers a call.
Whenever you get to a crime scene, you hope that it's been secure and cordoned off right after the discovery of the body. You don't want anybody into the crime scene that doesn't belong there. You don't want anybody messing up evidence. You want the evidence to be maintained in a secure fashion so that when you as a scientist get there to recover it, you can collect it without disturbing it, preserve it, bring it back to the laboratory, and do the tests that you need on it to find out who did the crime.
Dellamana marked the position of the body, the condition of the mattress and the surrounding area before he went to work collecting everything he could. Dellamana placed flags to mark the position of what little evidence he found. He marked 11 used cigarettes randomly scattered around the mattress. They hadn't been there long. That was a good sign. But who smoked them? The killer? The victim?
I felt it was going to be very hard not only to identify that person, but to generate some kind of evidence. I did feel at the crime scene that the cigarette butts present there were going to be very strong evidence because they did not look weathered. They were sitting up on top of the cushion of grass. I felt they had not been there very long.
As Dellamana assessed the situation, his technicians recorded the evidence. Since technicians don't want to leave part of themselves behind, they wear gloves. Dellamana's people had been trained so they don't unwittingly destroy the very clues that they're trying to save. If forensic scientists are careless in how they collect, store, or process evidence, they'll leave themselves vulnerable to attack in the courtroom. After the evidence was marked, photographed, and recorded, technicians carefully collected it. Bodies don't just turn up without someone missing them. Sheriff Toland already had a sinking suspicion about who the victim was. The week before, Jimmy Paris called him to report that his wife, Peggy Laughlin, was missing. Sheriff Toland decided it was time for his deputies to pay Paris a call.
You can't think of anywhere else she might have gone?
It was no secret around town that the couple had more than their share of knockdown, drag-out fights. No one would be surprised if Peggy just decided to up and leave. Meanwhile, the medical examiner compared the victim's backbone to spinal x-rays of Peggy Laughlin. They matched. Jimmy Paris became the prime suspect. But where was the evidence? Paris denied being anywhere near the woods that night. Delamanna tried to put the pieces together, but he didn't have enough of them to complete the picture. The forensics team turned up nothing at the crime scene. The cigarettes were the only clue untouched by the fire. The answer must lie with them. Detectives told him both Peggy and Jimmy smoked.
You can be looking at a case and feel going in that there isn't very much evidence there. The investigators don't think there's very much there to work with. But when you, as a forensic scientist, find that small piece of evidence, that one link that can either nail the suspect or clear a falsely accused individual, the rush that comes from that makes all the long hours worthwhile.
If he could lift DNA from the cigarette filters, he could compare it to the DNA of Paris and Laughlin. If he could prove they were together in the woods, Toland could make a case against Paris. Delamanna shined an ultraviolet light on the cigarettes. The light revealed the saliva-soaked areas. DNA can be obtained from saliva and lip cells. He marked the outline of the glowing portion he wanted to test. Then he carefully trimmed it away and sent it to the lab for DNA profiling.
To build a DNA profile, what we do first is we take our evidence sample, blood or saliva or whatever the DNA is in. Okay, what we do is we break open the cell and release the DNA. So we extract the DNA from whatever it's on. We clean it up and we look at specific areas or addresses on the DNA, and we make millions of copies of that area big enough so that we can see it. Once the DNA profile is done for each person in the case, we can then compare it to the evidence DNA profile and see if there's any matches there at all.
He was encouraged by the results. The lab identified DNA from 2 people, and 2 of the cigarettes held DNA from both people, meaning they shared their smokes. Could Delamanna prove those 2 people were Jimmy Paris and Peggy Laughlin? Testing Paris's DNA was simple. Cooperating with police, he gave a blood sample, which provided ample DNA to analyze. But getting Laughlin's DNA proved much more difficult. Delamanna had to try extracting it from her remains. He felt the best place to look for the DNA was in the marrow of the femur, or thigh bone. The largest bone in the body, it's the one most likely to have protected DNA from the fire. Bone marrow is rich in DNA. To expose as many cells as possible, Delamanna ground it into a powder. He gave the powder to another scientist for DNA extraction. The scientist places the powder into a chemical bath that breaks open the cell's nuclei, releasing the DNA. Once the DNA is in the solution, bone fragments, chemicals, and impurities must be removed. The liquid goes through a series of microscopic filters. A centrifuge spins away the refuse. The filters trap the clean DNA. Theoretically, scientists can obtain DNA from just one cell. But to create a profile, they generally need thousands, though that number is decreasing. Not long ago, tests required a sample the size of a dime. Today, they can extract usable DNA from a drop of blood the size of a pinhead. The DNA is isolated. Now it's time to measure it. When the DNA is drawn through a membrane, it creates a band of color. By comparing the color, scientists can determine how much DNA they have. Delamana examines the results, which appear as small dark bands on a piece of film. DNA is measured in minuscule quantities called nanograms, or billionths of a gram. The test results tell Delamana whether he has enough DNA to work with.
Unfortunately, there's only about 0.3 nanograms of DNA in that sample. That's point and then 9 zeros and a 3 grams of DNA in that sample.
Delamana didn't have enough usable DNA for testing. But he had an ace up his sleeve, a scientific process so revolutionary, its inventor, Carrie B. Mullis, won the Nobel Prize. Up until 1993, scientists could test DNA only if they had large quantities. But bacteria, heat, and time take their toll, degrading DNA and leaving it in fragments. A process called PCR, or polymerase chain reaction, enables scientists to make multiple copies of DNA. DNA is made up of 4 chemical units: adenine, A, thymine, T, guanine, G, and cytosine, C. These units are strung together like beads. A joins only with T, and G joins only with C. PCR works by splitting apart the double-stranded DNA like a zipper. The thermocycler heats the DNA, separating the A from the T and the G from the C, essentially unzipping the helix down the center. More of these chemicals are added to the solution, and the 2 halves of the helix use them to make themselves whole. Repeat the process, and the 2 become 4, and so on, until millions of copies are created and the sample can be measured. When making a DNA profile, scientists don't need to compare the entire DNA molecule. They only look at several sites along the helix. If these sites are the same on both samples, the DNA most likely came from the same person. It's considered a match. Scientists used PCR to create enough DNA from the bone to do a profile. But the quantity and quality of the DNA was poor, so they could measure only 1 site. But in order to make a match, they needed to identify at least 2 sites. How could they find that second site? Delamana knew that a child's DNA is a combination of both parents' DNA. To solve Peggy Laughlin's murder, Delamana needed help from her brothers and sisters. If he could do their profiles, then he could work backward and calculate Peggy's.
Once we knew we didn't have enough DNA to build Peggy's complete DNA profile, we had to go and get a blood sample from every one of her brothers and sisters that were in the United States. These samples came from all over the United States.
As Delamana's investigation continued, Sheriff Toland received a call about an abandoned van found in a neighboring town. A license check showed it belonged to Jimmy Paris. Inside, forensic scientists found blood on the ceiling and walls. Part of the carpeting had been torn out.
I tell you what, Dan, right. Above your head, right above your head.
Whoa, yeah.
You got 3.
I see it.
Based on this evidence, they obtained a search warrant for Paris's home.
Hey, Jimmy. Hey. Sorry to bother you, John. You let us in. That help us just fine. Stand inside there, back off with them.
Deputies searched the house for any clues that could link Paris to his wife's death. But they found nothing. Then an officer checked the crawl space and found a section of blood-soaked carpet. It matched the missing piece from Paris's van like a jigsaw puzzle. The possession of the carpet linked Paris to the bloodied van. Police had the murder scene, they had the victim, and they had their suspect. The evidence was strong enough to arrest Jimmy Paris for the murder of his wife. But to strengthen their case for conviction, police needed to link Paris, the van, and the burned mattress together. To do that, Paris had to be placed with the victim just before her death. Angelo Della was hard at work trying to accomplish just that. He was ready to make Peggy's DNA profile using the blood samples from her siblings.
We extracted them, put them through our full battery of DNA tests, and what we did was when we got the DNA profiles of the brothers and the sisters, we were able to work backwards and build the rest of Peggy's profile.
The genetic information Della gathered from the siblings enabled him to complete the missing link on Peggy's DNA. Peggy's DNA matched the DNA on the cigarettes. Here was proof that Peggy was alive with Jimmy in the woods the night she died. For forensics expert Paul Ferrara, the DNA match was the kind of evidence that tipped the scales against Jimmy Paris.
When looking at DNA evidence and the weight that you put on that DNA evidence, take that and place it in perspective with other evidence of motive, means, and opportunity. And when you combine all of those together, then one can come to an informed opinion that a person is guilty beyond reasonable doubt.
Paris had the motive, means, and opportunity to kill Peggy Laughlin. He was a jealous man, and he'd begun to suspect Peggy of infidelity. On that night, he invited her into the woods. He brought along a mattress, placing it on the ground and covering it with a blanket. Peggy and Jimmy smoked and talked, casually tossing aside the spent cigarettes. There, in the saliva and lip cells, lay the code of the murderer's identity, waiting to reveal its secret. Then, something happened that triggered a rage that drove Jimmy Paris to homicide.
The baby is crying too.
You just leave the baby.
No, I'm gonna go with the baby. You hear me?
Paris knew he had to destroy the body if he wanted to escape detection. Probably thought that if police couldn't find a body, they couldn't link him to the crime. He couldn't see that the evidence he had already left would be enough to convict him.
DNA analysis was crucial in the sense that it placed both the suspect and victim at the scene together. And in that case, having those small pieces of evidence allowed us to put a guilty man in prison and allow the family to put closure to a terrible incident.
In Alabama and Vancouver, scientists struggled to find DNA evidence to link a killer to his victim. But the power of DNA is not just its ability to put people behind bars. it also holds the key to setting them free. Attorney Barry Scheck, part of O.J. Simpson's criminal defense team, doesn't believe everyone behind bars is guilty. Using DNA, he's making a strong case. Scheck heads the Innocence Project, a program at the Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law in New York. The program is dedicated to exonerating the innocent through DNA profiling.
Serological Institute.
And that they had actually responded, we have something but not enough to test.
Scheck provides the expertise. The students do the legwork, sifting through hundreds of cases, looking for those with the most promise. Once cases are identified, the students investigate whether the evidence still exists. If it does, they see if it can be used for DNA testing.
I don't know. There's nothing in the red well 2 yet.
It became clear to us that DNA had the power to go back into old cases, re-examine it, and exonerate people that had been convicted many years ago, that lots of people felt might be innocent.
The Innocence Project helped exonerate 30 of the 40 people released through DNA since the project began in 1992. Today, startling FBI statistics show that 1/4 to 1/3 of all DNA testing at its lab clears a suspect. No one knows how many innocent people remain in prison across the United States, but the Innocence Project is doing its best to find them.
Now we have all these cases of people who have been convicted who can credibly come forward and say, look, I didn't commit this crime. There was serological evidence that was introduced against me. There was hair evidence that was introduced against me, for example. Please test items in my case. It'll prove me innocent. And that's happening in case after case after case.
What were the circumstances of the identification?
Louise Hochberg is the executive director of the Innocence Project. In 1993, a convict named Troy Webb appealed to her colleagues for help. He trusted DNA to prove he was innocent of rape.
Troy Webb first wrote to us in 1993, and I understand from Troy that the way he got to us was through his cellmate, who apparently was also a client of the Innocence Project.
Webb was arrested in 1988 after a rape victim picked him out of a photo lineup. Eyewitness identification has led to most convictions where defendants were later proved innocent through DNA profiling. Hochberg believed in Webb's innocence, but it would be 3 years before she and her students returned him to his family in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
The principal criteria for us is, number one, can this person make a credible claim of innocence? And number two, the most important, is there biological evidence in the case that we can test, which combined with other factors will be determinative, will prove that this person did not commit the crime for which he or she was convicted.
The Innocence Project had evidence in the case sent to Paul Ferrara's forensic lab in Richmond. There, scientists compared DNA from evidence left at the rape scene to DNA in a blood sample from Troy Webb.
The level of the technology, even 10 years ago, was such that we couldn't eliminate Troy Webb, for example, as the possible contributor of the genetic material. But by the same token, we wouldn't have been able to eliminate a large percent of the population.
Before they could start the testing process, the lab had to retrieve genetic material from evidence stored 7 years earlier. Once it was identified, they had to see if it contained viable DNA. They used an acid test to confirm the biological fluid was present. If the fluid is present, the indicator liquid turns purple. Another method is to use a light source, called an omnichrome, that makes fluids glow. If the scientist is looking for blood to test for DNA, she'll use a chemical called luminol to find it. Luminol can detect the faintest trace of blood, making it especially helpful in instances where blood may have been washed away by rain or where a killer has tried to remove it. In Troy Webb's case, investigators swabbed the evidence from the victim's clothing. The sample would contain the perpetrator's DNA. They'll compare it with Troy's DNA. Comparing DNA is a matter of comparing the lengths of strands of genetic code at specific points on the double helix. Scientists place the DNA sections they want to compare into a gel. The DNA has a negative charge, so scientists can use a positive charge to pull it through the gel. The longer pieces travel more slowly than the shorter pieces, so two pieces of the same length would move the same distance. If the DNA from the evidence and the suspect move the same distance across the gel, scientists know they're the same length and they have a match. If the segments don't move the same distance, they couldn't belong to the same person. The segment lengths can be seen and measured under lights that make the DNA fluoresce. These are the printouts of the actual DNA profiles in the Troy Webb case. They fade with time, so scientists take photographs for a permanent record. Scientists needed to compare only one site on Troy Webb's DNA strand to the DNA from the evidence. If it didn't match, he couldn't have committed the crime.
4.2, 4.3, and the corresponding pattern.
Besides comparing Webb's DNA to the evidence, it's also compared to the DNA of the victim and the rapist. The dot patterns make the differences between the DNA perfectly clear. None of the DNA matches the DNA from the evidence.
This DNA type did not come from Troy Webb, and the true rapist in this case is actually still at large right now.
On September 7th, 1996, the Innocence Project released the results. In Virginia, where new evidence may not be presented more than 21 days after sentencing, the only option was clemency. The governor reviewed the petition and granted the pardon.
There is no greater good that a lawyer can do, in my judgment, than to look back at old cases, and if it can be demonstrated that an injustice was done, to right it.
On October 16, 1996, Troy Webb emerged from prison a free man. The first thing he wanted to do was eat a 7-foot sub from Philadelphia Cold Cuts. He now works at the sub shop. He's made new friends and reestablished a bond with family. He lives with the same faith and hope that kept him going in prison, and he's grateful to the Innocence Project.
They're like family, really, you know, because wasn't for them, I'd probably still be locked up, you know. But they helped me, you know, for free at that, you know. So, couldn't ask for too much more.
All hope is not lost of catching the real rapist. Virginia has amassed the largest database of DNA in the country by collecting blood samples from every convicted felon.
20,000 a year.
Tens of thousands of blood samples pour in every year, creating a backlog of more than 135,000 samples in cold storage. Still, of the nearly 10,000 DNA profiles in the databank, Virginia has already solved 18 crimes by matching DNA from the crime scene. If the DNA from the case can be matched with DNA in the databank, the rapist will be found.
Our DNA data bank here was one of the early ones created. I think we had one hit in 1993, none in 1994, and then 5 in 1995, then 12 in 1996 alone. And the database, even in 1996, only numbered less than 9,000 profiles out of those 130,000 samples we have. When we get to the point where we have the convicted felon profiles, all 130,000 of them, the number of these hits is going to skyrocket dramatically until the point at which they are commonplace. If you are innocent of a crime, DNA technology is your best friend, your best ally. But conversely, if you're guilty, it's your worst enemy.
DNA profiling holds tremendous power for a technology still in its infancy. In its first 10 years, the diminutive double helix has quickly become one of the new detectives' biggest allies, bringing criminals to justice and delivering justice to the innocent.
In 1992, a young mother was gunned down in front of her children. Police searched for answers but found nothing. Then family members offered a startling clue. It would take local and federal agents to untangle an intricate web of money, drugs, and murder to capture the architects of a heartbreaking crime.
Two young boys were the only witnesses to their mother's murder. The horrible crime appeared unmotivated, senseless, and random. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The victim, the wife of a prominent Atlanta attorney, was also a woman burdened with a secret. The FBI believed that secret led to her death. They hoped its discovery would also lead to her killer.
November 29th, 1992, Atlanta, Georgia. Travelers returned home at the end of the Thanksgiving holiday. 39-year-old Sarah Tokars and her two children had spent the long weekend with her parents in Florida. Her husband, a well-known lawyer and judge, was away on business. After a 9-hour drive, they arrived safely in their suburban Atlanta neighborhood of Marietta. The house was dark as they pulled into the driveway. But it was not empty. Sarah did not see a man waiting in the shadows of the garage. He brandished a weapon. The gunman forced Sarah back into the SUV. The terrified woman had a 6-year-old at her side and a 4-year-old still asleep in the car. She had no choice. The man put his gun to Sarah's head and told her to drive towards the city. She followed instructions. As they reached an empty development, he told her to turn off. She refused. She pleaded with him to let her children go. He answered with with a single gunshot to her head. As the gunman grabbed her purse and fled, the vehicle kept rolling. The children still inside. When it came to a stop, Sarah's 6-year-old son had to reach across his mother's body to turn off the ignition. He unbuckled his groggy 4-year-old brother from his car seat, then ran to the nearest house. There, a neighbor called 911. Officers responded to the report of a possible homicide in the vicinity of Powers Road. Cobb County Police were dispatched immediately. Homicide detectives arrived as officers fanned out to search for the gunman. Police briefed them on the spot. The 2 young boys who witnessed the shooting identified the victim as their mother, Sarah Tokars. Their father, Fred Tokars, was out of town. Police were already trying to contact him. Forensic technicians examined the vehicle where it had stopped. There might be trace evidence outside as well as inside the car. An analysis confirmed what the boys had told police. The gunman was sitting directly behind Sarah Tokars when he pulled the trigger. Blood spatter patterns suggested he had used a shotgun. Detectives knew it would be difficult to get detailed information from children so young, especially after such a traumatic experience. The oldest one, 6 years old, would try his best. He said the killer was a black male, wearing jeans, a sweatshirt, and a cap. He could not be more specific. The boy didn't know which way the killer had run after he grabbed his mother's purse. But he said the weapon looked like a pirate's gun that you would see on TV. Detectives were not sure what he meant. Maybe the autopsy would tell them more. Detectives tracked down relatives living in the area to take custody of the boys until their father could be located. Police learned the family's address by running the plates on the vehicle. They continued the investigation at the Tokars' home where the abduction had occurred. In the living room, they found a security dowel lying next to a sliding glass door. The killer had likely entered the house here. The home security system had not been activated.
Right here, let's get some photographs.
No alarm sounded as the intruder entered.
And then after that, I want you to go ahead and process it.
Perhaps a burglar had taken advantage of the lax security, and Sarah surprised him when she returned home. Whoever the burglar was, he hadn't left any trace evidence at the Tokars' home. There was little to go on, according to Cobb County Chief Detective Arthur Allred.
At this point, we just really didn't know what happened. This was in a upper middle class neighborhood. This was a mother with her 2 children, and this type of crime was just didn't occur in this area at all. The most serious crime we had probably vandalism. So initially, we were really baffled as to what had happened and why.
Sarah's eldest son worked with a police sketch artist and described the man in the dark who had killed his mother. The drawing of a thin black man wearing a knit hat was released to the public. But the 6-year-old's description was too vague to elicit any viable leads. The victim's husband, Fred Tokars, was contacted at his hotel in Montgomery, Alabama. He returned to Atlanta immediately. As a criminal defense attorney, Tokars was aware he would be considered an early suspect in his wife's murder. He had his own attorney present when he spoke to authorities. They quickly established his alibi so police could pursue more promising leads. Detectives confirmed that at the time of the murder, Fred Tokars was in Alabama. He had been visiting a client incarcerated in the Montgomery jail. The grieving husband assured police that he and Sarah had a strong marriage. He would do anything he could to help find her killer.
Due to the nature of what's going on, we have a job to do.
All right, guys.
Tokars agreed to walk detectives through the house.
Anything's been messed up here.
As far as he knew, the doors were locked and the security rod was in place when he left for Montgomery. He explained that they had intentionally left the alarm off because a plumber was scheduled to fix the hot water heater over the weekend. Tokars led detectives to the basement where he kept his home office. He said he usually had about $1,500 locked in the safe. Now it was open and empty.
I do keep some cash in there.
Its combination was hidden in a nearby file. Only he and his wife knew it was there. Perhaps Sarah had taken the money on her trip to Florida. It was also possible that the burglar had found the combination and taken the cash. Ultimately, Tokars couldn't specify how much money, if any, was missing. To police, nothing else in the house seemed disturbed, and no clues pointed to the killer's identity.
A lot of people were frightened. A lot of people just couldn't believe that this would happen to a mother in front of her children, and especially in the neighborhood where it occurred. So there was a lot of pressure on the department to find who had killed her.
Police hoped the coroner's report would give them more. Lab examiners confirmed that Sarah Tokars had been killed with a .410 shotgun. To a child, if that type of weapon had been sawed off, it might look like a 17th century flintlock pistol used by pirates on TV. Only the plastic wadding and buckshot were recovered from the SUV.
It might be a 410 or maybe a 20 gauge.
Because no shell casing had been ejected, they would not be able to match anything to a specific weapon if one were later found.
Maybe 410. I'll get to the ballistics for you.
The examiner discovered no foreign hairs, fibers, or fingerprints on the body or clothing. The anonymous killer had left nothing that could lead investigators to his identity. Former Assistant United States Attorney Buddy Parker, like many members of the Atlanta community, was stunned by the news of the murder.
We had a discussion that morning about the notoriety of the homicide, of it being the wife of Fred Tokars, who was known within the legal community, having been a former Assistant District Attorney for Fulton County. I was familiar with Fred Tokars in his role as a criminal defense lawyer in a matter that was then pending in our office, a matter regarding the investigation of a particular drug dealer.
Fred Tokars' lucrative criminal defense practice brought him into contact with many men accused of federal drug charges. Rarely does such a murder have a simple motive. Solving the case would not be easy. The following day, 2 women came to the Cobb County Police Station. Sarah Tokar's sister and her cousin had a file they needed to show detectives. Sarah had entrusted her sister with the file 3 years earlier.
You know what this is?
This is some of her husband, Fred.
At the time, Sarah made her promise to take it to police if anything ever happened to her. It contained what appeared to be lists of Fred Tokar's bank accounts and their balances. The women suggested that the papers might be related to Sarah's attempt to divorce Fred. Her sister's marriage was not as strong as Fred had led police to believe.
That might be so, but I know what you've been doing.
Sarah wanted a divorce, but whenever she broached the subject, he threatened to use his legal connections to get sole custody of their children.
All right, guys. Let me tell you something.
Sarah was trapped. If
If
she ever hoped to divorce Fred and keep her children, she needed leverage.
Well, in case there was a divorce.
After the incident, Sarah had secretly copied some of Fred's files and gave them to her sister for safekeeping.
Quite a long time.
She suspected they outlined illegal activities he might be involved in. If that were so, they could be her only leverage against him in court. Investigators reviewed the files carefully. Perhaps they would help police determine whether Sarah Tokar's death was a botched robbery or a carefully planned conspiracy. Cobb County detectives called the FBI office in Atlanta for help. They hoped that Special Agent Michael Twible could determine if Fred Tokar's bank statements were somehow linked to the murder.
We were contacted by the Cobb County authorities concerning the documents they had discovered, which were brought to them by Sarah Tokar's sister and cousin, which revealed that Mr. Tokar's, her husband, had been involved in setting up offshore bank accounts and offshore corporations.
It would take time for Agent Twible and his team to unravel the names and finances on those documents to see if they had something or nothing to do with the death of Sarah Tokar's. On December 3rd, 1997, 4 days after the shooting, Sarah Tokar's was laid to rest. Her 2 children were left motherless. Investigators still had no leads that pointed to the identity of her killer. Whoever had killed the young mother was still out on the streets. Just after Thanksgiving in 1997, the FBI and local investigators continued their search for the lone gunman who shot and killed Sarah Tokar's, the wife of a prominent Atlanta attorney, in front of her 2 young children. Sarah's 6-year-old child had given a vague description of the suspect to police in Cobb County, Georgia, but they still had no solid leads. Copies of her husband's bank statements were sent to the FBI field office in Atlanta for closer scrutiny. Special Agent Michael Twible hoped to provide insight as to whether the documents might somehow be connected to Sarah Tokar's murder.
Once we reviewed these documents, it revealed that Mr. Tokar's had set up offshore banks and corporations not only in the Turk and Caicos but in Montserrat and in the Bahamas. These documents also showed that he had set up numerous corporations and nominees' names in the Atlanta, Georgia area.
Nominees are people who in name only head dummy corporations for purposes of money laundering. Although Fred Tokar's had never been accused of money laundering himself, he was an expert on the subject. Buddy Parker, a former assistant U.S. attorney, was aware that Tokar's was not only a well-known lawyer, he was also a certified public accountant.
Fred Tokar's was known within the Atlanta legal community as a person who held himself out to be an expert in money laundering and in fact conducted lectures for law enforcement authorities at the state level on money laundering.
Investigating the finances of a man like Fred Tokars would be a delicate business. He was well liked and well connected among Atlanta's power elite.
He was well known in Cobb County. He was also well known in political circles, in as much as he had been appointed as an assistant municipal court judge, and he had been an assistant solicitor for Fulton County. He had a lot of friends in high political places and helped on numerous campaigns of state and local officials.
I'm wondering if you have any...
Investigators again met with Tokars and his attorney. They told him they believed his business dealings could be connected to his wife's killing and asked him about his clients.
Has your wife mentioned anything to you about anyone that she...
Fred Tokars admitted several were violent drug dealers who operated in dangerous circles. One in particular was reputed to have been a major cocaine supplier in the Atlanta area. The dealer had returned home to Detroit after another one of Tokars' clients had allegedly forced him out of the South. Not long after, he was gunned down in front of his mother's home. The murder weapon, a handgun found later in a nearby alley, had been traced back to a gun shop north of Atlanta. Tokars suggested that the dealer's remaining crew, or even those who murdered him, could have had Sarah killed to send a message to the lawyer.
We can arrange something and get it over to you.
Detectives secured a warrant to search the attorney's office to see if they could find any link to the killer in his papers. That night, local investigators and IRS agents conducted a thorough search of the office. They confiscated files, date books, and business calendars dating back several years, but found no direct clues to the murder. In the margins of Tokars' date books, agents did find notations of offshore accounts. The total deposited in these accounts far exceeded the amount Tokars claimed on his taxes each year. It looked as if Fred Tokars had used his expertise in money laundering to his own financial advantage. Local and federal officials met with representatives of the Atlanta United States Attorney's Office. They suspected Fred Tokars' illegal activities went far beyond money laundering.
Money laundering was already on our radar screen, if you will. Secondly, now we have evidence coming out of the Tokars' home of offshore bank accounts. With those two clear facts, we felt that there was a firm basis to open an investigation formally on Fred Tokars.
Parker learned that in August of 1992, the DEA had arrested one of Tokars' clients in a sting operation. His name was Anthony Brown. Brown had a reputation as a cocaine dealer in Atlanta. The day before, agents had intercepted one of his couriers in Texas and seized more than 100 kilos of cocaine. Inside the trunk of Brown's car, agents found $50,000 in cash. They also found documents revealing Fred Tokars was more than Brown's defense attorney. He had incorporated an Atlanta nightclub for the drug dealer.
It was believed by law enforcement that the nightclub was a front to help launder the drug proceeds of the drug trafficking organization that Brown was a member of.
DEA agent Jeff Dahlman had participated in the sting operation to arrest Brown. Parker hoped Dahlman's drug trafficking case would help with the murder investigation.
What had happened as a result of the homicide of Mrs. Tokars was that the light got turned on Fred Tokars' past of what he had been doing for the past several years. And what was illuminated
was that he'd been involved with several drug traffickers in the Atlanta area.
Investigators wondered how deep that involvement went. Police re-interviewed Tokar's neighbors to see if they had missed anything.
I was wondering if on Sunday evening...
One close friend confirmed that Sarah wanted to divorce her husband, but she was afraid of him. Not long before she was murdered, Sarah confided that she had found some of her husband's documents that seemed suspicious. According to the neighbor, Sarah said these weren't simply lists of offshore accounts. They were stronger proof of criminal activities.
Hey, listen, I need to give you a call back. Yeah, just a few minutes.
About a week and a half before Sarah Tokar's murder, Sarah Tokar's explained to her that she now had the goods on Fred, that she had found documents or records that indicated he had engaged in or was engaging in tax evasion, and that she was going to go to the authorities with this information and she could then get a divorce.
If Sarah had confronted her husband with the evidence, it might have motivated him to harm her. Investigators additionally found the name of a Tokar's private investigator. The PI admitted to agents that Tokar's had hired him to approach drug dealers about laundering their profits. He was listed as one of the owners, along with Fred Tokar's, of another Atlanta nightclub, according to Special Agent Michael Twyble.
We determined that he was an owner of a company, but through our further investigation, we realized that he was a nominee. And when I say the word nominee, I mean the fact that he was delegated to the person being legally responsible as being an owner of the club, but in actuality, he was not.
Fred Tokar's had constructed the entire scheme. According to the private eye, Tokar's courted reputed drug dealers like Anthony Brown, men who had a lot of cash, but no place to invest it without raising suspicions of the IRS. Tokar's, a money laundering expert, proposed depositing their drug profits in offshore accounts and in businesses like clubs that operated primarily on a cash basis. The money could then be filtered through legitimate financial institutions.
And the way you would launder the money is, even though it's still in cash, you would pay entertainers on paper $15,000, when in actuality you paid them $5,000 cash.
Tokar's would receive thousands for each transaction.
He was actively involved, knowing that these people were drug traffickers and what they were doing with their money. The object was to open corporations, mainly nightclubs, cash businesses where they could easily hide their assets, where they could easily run their drug proceeds through them.
Authorities believe the connection between Fred Tokar's and drug traffickers had somehow led to his wife's murder. But the details were elusive.
Not! Get back in that car now!
Weeks after the murder of Sarah Tokar's, a man capable of murdering an innocent mother in front of her children remained at large.
Got a shotgun blast to the back of the...
By December 1992, several weeks after Sarah Tokar's was killed, federal and state authorities had still not found the lone gunman and still had no clues to his identity.
So it's a lot of...
Shortly before she was brutally murdered, Sarah believed she had discovered papers in her husband's law office that documented his illegal activities. Former U.S. prosecutor Buddy Parker believed that Sarah had likely threatened to expose Fred Tokar's with those documents unless he agreed to a divorce.
That began to give us a feeling that Sarah Tokar's was murdered to keep her mouth shut about her knowledge or her belief about her husband's role and involvement in laundering drug money for drug traffickers.
Fred Tokar's not only represented violent drug dealers, he had gone into business with them. Investigators now had evidence Tokar's clients were laundering money through several nightclubs. If his wife had threatened to expose him, Tokar's, as well as his clients, had a lot to lose. The FBI took a hard look at the nightclubs the attorney had incorporated. Special Agent Michael Twible had to wade through piles of state records, searching for a name that could link Tokar's directly to the murder.
We started reviewing company and corporation records and liquor license and business license that Mr. Tokar's had incorporated. We started looking at these different clubs to see actually who owned them.
Major drug suppliers like Al Brown contributed the funds. A middleman purchased the clubs. And Tokar set up the entire deal, as DEA agent Jeff Dahlman discovered.
They didn't really trust Mr. Tokar's to launder money in offshore bank accounts. It was too elaborate. They wanted their money where they could touch it, where they could feel it, where they could use it every day, where they could buy cars with it. And so the laundering, in essence, in this investigation, turned towards the laundering of money through nightclubs, through incorporation of the nightclubs.
FBI agents interviewed employees of the nightclubs. Over time, they were able to piece together the structure of the business, its owners, and its profits. To Attorney Parker, it was like assembling a complex puzzle.
The picture of how the nightclub money laundering was structured was really developed through insiders, through inside drug traffickers who ultimately decided to cut plea agreements with us and to cooperate and provide evidence.
But nothing from the nightclubs pointed to Sarah Tokar's killer. After months of frustration, Cobb County Police finally got a break. A detective working on the case got a tip from his brother, a deputy in nearby Fulton County. The deputy remembered seeing Fred Tokar's name in the file for a businessman who had an outstanding arrest warrant. The businessman's name was Eddie Lawrence, wanted for writing bad checks on one of Tokar's accounts. Of all Tokar's business associates and clients, Eddie Lawrence was a name he had never mentioned to police. Authorities quickly learned that Eddie Lawrence and Fred Tokar's were involved in several businesses together. These included construction, renovation, and mortgage companies. Tokar's had also defended Lawrence in several minor brushes with the law. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead they had left.
Eddie Lawrence had, through Fred Tokar's, been granted access to some of the most prominent individuals within the city. Fred would take Eddie to some of the big political fundraising functions, and all of a sudden Eddie was, like I said, he's very presentable. He could certainly mingle and not be embarrassed at cocktail functions and things, and engage in conversations, and so he was living this wonderful life, and the way he got there was through Fred Tokar's.
A few days later, the young businessman agreed to questioning after police discovered records of calls between he and Tokar's on the day of the murder. Eddie Lawrence said he had been in business with Fred Tokar's for almost a year. He claimed the phone calls were all job-related. He knew nothing about Sarah Tokar's murder. The detectives had Lawrence arrested on the bad check charge and then released him on bond. They wanted to see which one of Tokar's associates got nervous when they heard Lawrence was being investigated.
This is a shock to me when I heard about her death.
The plan worked. The confidential informant contacted police. The word on the street was that Eddie Lawrence had been looking for a hitman prior to Sarah Tokar's murder. He had pressured one of his employees to help him find someone to kill a woman who he claimed stood in the way of a lot of money. The employee gave Lawrence a name, Curtis Rower. Rower was a drug addict with a long rap sheet including armed robbery. He needed money. Maybe he'd be interested. Although the informant didn't mention Fred Tokars by name, investigators finally had a potential link between the victim's husband, Eddie Lawrence, and a hitman. Detectives interviewed Eddie Lawrence.
No, I deny it.
We have information.
They questioned him about his relationship with Tokars.
That says recently you were trying to get him done.
Why would I have somebody
He claimed no involvement in the murder.
when I had nobody hurt?
Police felt he was lying.
Making any progress here. I have a warrant. Your name.
On December 16th, 1992, police detained Lawrence and revoked his bail because of the flight risk. They wanted him in custody when they went after Curtis Rower. Detectives immediately secured search and arrest warrants for a house in College Park where Rower was staying. They proceeded with caution. If Rower was capable of killing an innocent woman in cold blood, there was no telling what he might do when cornered. On December 22nd, 1992, 3 weeks after a mother of two was murdered, Cobb County Police circled a home in College Park to arrest suspected hitman Curtis Rower. The woman who answered the door said she wasn't sure if Rower was home. An initial sweep of the house produced nothing. Still, they kept up their guard. One officer thought he heard movement in a bedroom.
Curtis, you're in the bed. You see your hands.
It was Curtis Rower.
Hands where I can see them. Stay on the ground. Stay facing.
He was unarmed.
One out further. Lay down, all the way down. Spread your hands out. Keep them spread.
Rower was booked and charged with murder.
Give me your left hand.
He claimed that Eddie Lawrence, Fred Tokars' business partner, had offered him $5,000 to kill Sarah Tokars, but Rower was too scared to go through with it. He said Lawrence was the one who had caused Sarah's death. Rower admitted that he had carjacked the family. But when Sarah Tokars stopped, he said that he couldn't pull the trigger. At that moment, Eddie Lawrence ran up to the car, screaming for Rower to shoot. Lawrence grabbed the shotgun and it went off, killing Sarah Tokars. Both men then fled in Lawrence's car. Though police believed Rower was downplaying his role, Sarah's 6-year-old son was the only other witness they had to refute his claim. He remembered only one shooter. The boy would be forced to identify the man who terrorized his family from a lineup unless Eddie Lawrence corroborated Rower's story. Authorities charged Eddie Lawrence with conspiracy to commit murder, but Lawrence refused to confirm or deny Rower's statement. Cobb County Police notified Fred Tokars that Eddie Lawrence and Curtis Rower had been formally charged with his wife's murder. He received the news at Sarah's parents' house in Florida, where he was vacationing with his sons for the holidays.
Who was on the phone?
the police, they've arrested someone for the murder. So, thank God for that.
His relatives later said that while the rest of the family expressed relief, Fred Tokars did not. He seemed despondent. The arrests of Lawrence and Rower had made national headlines. Tokars was caught in that same spotlight and refused to give any statements to the press. Because the suspected hitman's story conflicted with Tokars' son's version, the 6-year-old was asked to view a suspect lineup. Police explained that though he would be able to see 5 men staring at him, they would not be able to see him. The one-way mirror would prevent that. When the child said he was ready, investigators called for the men. All of them resembled the boy's description of his mother's killer.
Okay, Michael. One of these gentlemen may be the person.
Detectives reassured him that he could take as much time as he needed.
You should take your time. You should look at it closely. You should tell me.
But it was no use. The child was either too young or too frightened to remember the killer's face. When relatives tried to reach Fred Tokars in Florida to inform him, he was nowhere to be found.
Fred left the company of his in-laws and returned to his hotel room where no one heard from him. And the following morning, they tried to raise him on the telephone. They tried to find him, and there were no responses.
Concerned, Sarah's father rushed to the hotel where Tokars was staying.
Fred! Fred! Fred!
Fred Tokars had swallowed a handful of sleeping pills and washed it down with beer. The manager of the hotel quickly called an ambulance.
He had apparently attempted to take his life after hearing that Eddie Lawrence, this business partner of his, had been arrested for the murder of his wife.
Sarah's father found a note written in Fred Tokars' handwriting on the table beside the bed. In the locked hotel room, Fred Tokars wrote a long, rambling note apologizing for the pain and suffering his lifestyle had inflicted upon his family. He wrote that Sarah was a great woman. Then, on the day before Christmas Eve, Fred Tokars swallowed a handful of sleeping pills, enough to kill him. Fred Tokars lay on the bed, barely breathing. If he died, the truth about his wife's murder might die with him.
Come on, Fred.
Yes, there's been emergency.
In late December of 1992, Fred Tokars, the once prominent Atlanta attorney now suspected in his wife's murder, lay motionless in a Florida hotel room from an overdose of sleeping pills. He was rushed to a nearby hospital where they were able to revive him.
Thank you for coming down today.
After his release, he held a press conference.
Really tough time for myself and also for my children.
He told the public that he was very depressed and that the media was not making it easy.
We did this terrible crime.
Tokars had gone to the extent of establishing residency in Florida to avoid the attention.
The whole way through this, so.
But he believed that justice would soon be served.
Mr. Tokars, may we have your comment on the arrest of Eddie Lawrence?
The FBI believed justice would soon be served as well. Convinced that Fred Tokars had used his business associate Eddie Lawrence to hire a hitman to kill Fred's wife, Sarah, the team of federal and local investigators would use federal racketeering statutes known as RICO to prosecute Tokars. Building a RICO case to prove Sarah Tokars had been killed to protect her husband's illegal activities meant outlining those activities in detail.
The RICO statute, it attacks basically this conspiracy of individuals who are out committing all types of different crimes, not necessarily together, but they're all for the benefit of this criminal group to exist, to continue to exist, and to make money.
Looks like things are coming together a little bit. I appreciate all you.
A federal grand jury named Tokars as an unindicted co-conspirator in the homicide.
Yeah, we've come up with some.
Though Tokars' partner, Eddie Lawrence, had remained silent after 7 months in prison, investigators hoped the public indictment might encourage Lawrence to testify against Tokars. Not long after, the Atlanta U.S. Attorney's Office received a phone call that Eddie Lawrence was ready to cooperate in exchange for sentencing consideration.
We've got some work to do. Let's go.
For Lawrence's long-awaited statement, investigators secured a remote location in Georgia that would be monitored by chopper surveillance. DEA agent Jeff Dahlman was part of the team that needed to make sure nothing went wrong.
We were there before Mr. Lawrence was brought in. His location had been kept a secret from everybody involved. The only people that knew of where Mr. Lawrence was actually being held at that time were the Cobb County Police Department. Mr. Lawrence at that time was a key witness in this investigation, and his safety was paramount to everyone.
Inside a fortified house, Eddie Lawrence told investigators that he and Tokars were not just partners in the construction business. They were also involved in laundering drug money.
$900,000.
Lawrence told FBI Special Agent Michael Twyble the details of the scheme.
Mr. Tokars wanted him to try to solicit drug clients in the various nightclubs and bring them to him so he could launder their money. And in turn also set up Eddie Lawrence into several businesses.
Yeah, we can get this one just a little bit later.
Lawrence owed his success to Tokars. He also owed the attorney $70,000 in business debts.
Fred Tokars approached Eddie Lawrence indicating that, that Sayward now was going to try to divorce him and take everything he had, and he wasn't going to let that happen, and he couldn't afford to allow her to do that to him, and he wanted her killed.
Lawrence refused initially. Although he had been involved in drug dealing, he had never been involved in murder.
Mr. Lawrence said, well, just let her have the house and the kids and the cars. And Mr. Tokars said, I'd worked so hard, I'm not going to let her have it.
Lawrence said that Tokars planned the murder for several months. His first idea was to have Sarah shot in his office, but decided the couple's home was a better location. Tokars was to pay Lawrence $25,000 for the hit.
Mr. Lawrence advised that Mr. Tokars wanted to be out of town and that for Mr. Lawrence to commit the murder as a burglary, basically in front of his children, which is very unusual. He told Mr. Lawrence that the kids would get over it, that they're young, and it wouldn't bother them saying that their mother was murdered.
I found that
Lawrence admitted he didn't have the nerve to kill an innocent woman, so he hired Curtis Rower. After Rower shot Sarah Tokars, Lawrence drove him away from the scene. Since he cooperated, Lawrence earned 12.5 years for his part in setting up the murder. The hitman he hired, Curtis Rower, was sentenced to life without parole. For the time being, Tokars was still a free man.
Mr. Tokars had custody of his 2 children. Our concern during this time and the rest of Mr. Tokars was that there could be some harm done to the children. And Mr. Tokars was aware that he'd been watched. The media was still down in Florida at the time. He knew that people were watching him daily, and we had to develop a plan to get Mr. Tokars out of the house where there'd be no harm done to the children or to himself, and tried to effect the arrest.
The agents knew Tokars hated the press. They posed as reporters, lurking around the condo, hoping to elicit a response from the wanted man.
And the game plan at that time was to have Mr. Tokars come out and check us out, which he had done previously to other people that had been parked in the area. The plan worked well. He came downstairs. He called the police.
Local officers arrived, aware of the rules. Fred Tokars emerged from his condo to file a complaint.
What we need you to do, sir, is go ahead and put your hand on your phone. You're under arrest.
Instead, he was arrested.
Spread your legs for me.
Fred Tokars pleaded not guilty to the charges against him.
Go ahead and put your hand on. She told Karen.
But separate state and federal juries found him guilty of racketeering, money laundering, murder for hire, and murder. He was sentenced to 4 life terms with no chance of parole. For elevating his greed beyond the life of his wife and children, he will never be free again.
They seemed very happy, very connected.
Chris had a crush on her in high school.
She was my stepmom. I considered her like my best friend.
When Chris and Heidi were in the process of moving, Chris started drinking again. It was pretty out of control.
His mind was gone.
He hit me across the head twice, man. He lit me up.
Because of the alcohol, he'd been acting strange.
I lost my father, but I also lost my stepmom.
The search took us to this concrete tomb. The concrete was probably a foot deep. You wouldn't have known there was a body there.
Paulding County is very small. Everybody knows everybody. Didn't have to worry about anything bad happening to you.
Heidi was very well known in the local area because of her family and their wedding or catering business, especially with small towns. I feel like everybody knew Heidi Grant, or the Grant family name at least.
With Heidi, took pride in planning weddings and making sure everybody's special day was just right for them. It was her family business, so it was more than a job to her.
Me and Heidi were good friends. We chatted a lot, we'd plan get-togethers. She was a very likable, funny person.
We liked to go shopping and listen to music together. She was also there for me, like friends. We were really close.
Her ex-husband and her have 2 children. She has a boy and a girl, but they did not live with her. They live with their dad.
Chris had a crush on her in high school. As they graduated, they both went their separate ways, and then they reconnected later on Facebook. Chris and Heidi, they were both divorced, and I think that they had a lot in common as far as that goes.
It was definitely a little weird seeing my dad with someone else, but I really grew to like her. It was a really good friendship, but also they were in love too. When my parents got divorced, I stayed with my mom for a week, and then I would go to my dad's and Heidi's for a week. Heidi and I, we did a lot together. She took me to school every day. We were really close, like friends. Heidi was a very big factor in my softball career too. She was at every single game.
Chris went to AA meetings 2-3 times a week, and Heidi was very supportive of him getting help and staying sober. It was definitely a struggle for Chris. He would get a handle on it, and then something happened, stress or even happiness, excitement, and it would trigger him.
Chris was very open with Heidi about his struggles with alcohol. I think that she thought she could really help him through it and keep him sober. Chris stopped over one day and he said that he was going to ask Heidi to marry him.
Chris seemed very excited. He couldn't wait to propose. Things were falling into place for Chris and Heidi and Olivia.
Chris and Heidi got married at Grant's Catering Hall. We were all supposed to be there, but COVID had hit and we weren't able to gather for that day.
It was just my dad, Heidi, me, and then Heidi's dad. I was glad to be able to witness it. They seemed very happy. It looked like it was going to be very bright in the future.
Shortly after Chris and Heidi got married, they decided to move back to Antwerp, which was closer to the catering business. They found a nice little house right in the center of town.
Chris took medications, help him with his drinking. He took a pill, which if he chose to drink, it would make him really sick. And the pill was very effective for Chris.
He was in a really good point in his life. He was really happy. He had stopped taking his medication because he felt happy. He felt like he could handle life, you know. That was the wrong thing. He should have kept taking them.
When Chris and Heidi found this house in Antwerp and they were in the process of moving, Chris started drinking again.
When my mom passed away in August of 2021, it affected us a lot. It affected Chris really bad.
We were all very worried that Chris was drinking again. Having to lose his mom in life was probably the worst thing he'd ever experienced as far as loss and pain. That's what set off, the spiral, I believe, to his drinking again. When Chris would drink, he'd start out as fun-loving and easygoing, and if he got really drunk, then it was argumentative. This time, when Chris started drinking, it was pretty out of control.
When I went to work one morning, Heidi showed up and she asked me if I could help them move. Basically, all they had left in Oakwood to move was the heavier stuff. She said Chris had been drinking. She didn't want him driving. And I told her, well, I can't really leave right now, but Dad and my older brother Dave are down at his house. I'm sure they would help you get the rest of your stuff out. So they went, hooked up my dad's trailer and took it over there. And just as they were leaving the house, Chris showed up. He was annoyed that my dad and my brother, Dave, was there to finish helping them move. They started arguing in the driveway, and Chris went to grab a hold of my brother, Dave, and Dave grabbed a hold of him and took his legs out from underneath him and put him on the ground and said, "I'm gonna let you up and we'll leave and that'll be that."
When we got home from work, we found out that an altercation had happened, an argument, and Chris was drinking. Heidi and Chris, they were in an argument still. Heidi did not want to go home and deal with Chris drinking and arguing all night. So she was coming over to our house. When she showed up at her house, Heidi was angry is what she was. She said, "I will never let a man destroy me or my family's name again." And she was very adamant about that. Here we're Paulding County area. It's all very small town. Gossip spreads like wildfire.
She was more worried about her family name than anything.
Heidi, she was always worried about what could happen if, say, the law was called or, she didn't want her business, her family's name dragged through the mud.
What's your emergency?
Get the out. Hello? Hey, man, my wife should try to kill me. Get the out. Hello? Hey, man, my wife should try to kill me.
On January 13th, 2022, a 911 call was made in reference to a domestic dispute that had occurred.
How'd you do that?
Hit me with a fucking... I was laying in my chair, she fucking hit me across the head twice, man. It lit me up.
What'd she hit you with?
Table leg.
The caller was Christopher Franklin, and he reported that he had been hit in the head by his wife. The dispatcher contacted me, and I decided I should go to the residence and just see what was going on. The dispatcher didn't report it to me as an active domestic violence incident, which means that it was going on. It was something that had already occurred. Half the party had already left. When I arrived at the property, Heidi Grant come to the door and stepped out onto the porch to talk to me. She was surprised that I was there, and I told her that Christopher had called and alleged that, she had hit him. And then she proceeded to tell me that he had been up all night drinking and he was now sleeping. She told me that there had been, no acts of violence between neither one of them in the house, and she just suspected that he was intoxicated when he made the call. When I asked her if we should go inside and talk to Chris, she said, "George, I'd really rather you not. If we wake him up, he's probably just going to become agitated. Then I'll have hell to pay." We had dealt with Christopher on many occasions. We did know that he suffered from alcoholism, and I believed what she was telling me, that he was probably in there passed out. She said if there was any issues or anything, she would be sure and call. And at that point, I left the house.
When I came to the house, my dad wasn't there. Heidi told me that he was at work. I packed my bag real quick, and then she took me to Indiana, and I was gonna come home Sunday night. When Heidi picked me up from the tournament, we came home. My dad's truck wasn't there. We watched TV in the living room that night, and she just kept saying, "I wonder where your dad is, I wonder where your dad is." The next morning, Heidi told me that she found Dad's phone in the bedroom, and she said that one of his friends tried to call him, and that's how she found it.
When Chris would drink, he would get in his car and take off. And we were always concerned with driving, and drinking and getting in an accident, not just hurting himself, but somebody else.
Heidi told me that she drove around looking for him. She said that she called local hospitals, local police stations, local bars. That Tuesday morning when I woke up, he still wasn't home, and that's when I really got concerned. Heidi took me looking for him, going around places that he would be. I asked Heidi if she called the police and to file a missing persons report, and she said that they couldn't do anything because he was an adult and that he could just leave on his own. That Thursday when I went back to my mom's house, I was more nervous that something bad happened to him. Something definitely didn't feel right. I was definitely really worried. My dad always wanted me to do my best. He always pushed me to do my best. He was a very big support in my softball. He would come practice with me. He would tell me what I was doing wrong and try to help me fix it. He was really funny, and he always had to crack a joke or make someone laugh. I told my mom more details about it and said that I was really worried. She then texted my uncle Dave about it and said Dad has been missing for this many days.
Heidi talked about Chris was struggling with suicide. She talked about this song that he sent to everybody on his friends list, like on Facebook or Messenger, and it was a suicide song.
Heidi said that Chris's vehicle was out at the catering business with the door open, the keys, his wallet, everything was left in the vehicle with tracks leading down to the river.
Made it sound like maybe he killed himself and, jumped in the river. Dave, my brother-in-law, walked the river in Picasso there for days looking for him because he thought that, like maybe he had committed suicide over there.
Paulding County Sheriff's Office.
Hello, my name is Dave Franklin.
My brother-in-law called Paulding County Sheriff's Department to report his brother Chris missing.
I'm from Payne, Ohio. I need to make a silver alert. Apparently my brother's been gone since Sunday.
His workplace said that he hadn't been there that whole week. That's when Dave thought, I need to call and file a missing persons report. We had to find out where he was at.
Okay, what's your brother's name?
Chris Franklin. His wife's name's Heidi Grant.
Okay, why hasn't she called?
I couldn't tell you.
I coach high school wrestling when I'm not working at the police department. I was at a wrestling tournament, and that's when I received a call from my officer telling me that he had a missing persons case and that it was Christopher Franklin. I asked the officer, who was making the report, and he told me that it was Christopher Franklin's brother, Dave Franklin, and that Heidi had not. He had gathered a little bit more information, and some things that he told me seemed a little off to me. The officer told me that Heidi had found Christopher Franklin's truck at the place of business where she worked, and then also that she had found Christopher's cell phone underneath the bed. That's when I decided to head back to Antwerp and speak with Heidi Grant.
Hi. Are you Heidi? Come on back, Heidi. Come on back. He's back here on the phone. Just have a seat over there. Thank you for coming out. I greatly appreciate it.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you. My suspicions were starting to rise that, there was just definitely more to the story than him just going off somewhere.
Tell me where he's at. That's all I need to know. Just tell me where he's at, Heidi. This is such a nightmare. Okay, what's your husband's name? Chris. C-H-R-I-S Franklin.
My wife, Captain Clemens, is always usually right there with me, assisting me. So when I interviewed Heidi, she was in the room with me.
How long have you been married?
Since November 27th. Only 2 months.
2 months.
I did know Heidi before this happened. I used to babysit her children when they were little. When you live in a small community, you know everybody. Everybody is everybody's neighbor or relative in this town.
Okay, when did you last see him, talk to him?
It was Sunday. I left at about 10.
16th.
So the last time that Heidi actually told us she had seen Chris would have been on that Sunday morning. She had gone to pick up Chris's daughter, Olivia, from a softball tournament.
I left, and before I left, I had asked him to come with me so I could like make sure he stayed sober. And he's like, I don't feel like going there. And he's like, I'm gonna try to go over to Oakwood and get more stuff. And I looked at him and I said, if you pick that bottle back up, don't come back until you're sober. And that was the last thing I said to him.
Heidi said that when she returned with Olivia, his truck was gone.
So I went in, I checked the house, he wasn't there. So I just assumed he was in Oakwood getting stuff, like, because that's what he said he was gonna do.
The next morning when Heidi got up, she said she drove to the Oakwood home thinking he'd probably crashed there from drinking because she had told him not to come home if he was going to drink.
Heidi said she just drove around to different spots in an attempt to locate where Chris might be. And then at one point, Olivia even was with her.
We drove up and down. I don't remember what day it was, but we drove up and down.
Heidi indicated that a few days after Chris had been gone, she located his truck at the back of her business.
So what day did you find his truck in?
That was Tuesday. But I was like shocked to see his truck sitting behind our warehouse, and like I never even thought to look there. I just assumed he had his truck.
She said it was odd that she'd found the truck there. The door was a little bit ajar, keys on the ground. So she thought that was strange because he really loved his truck. Chris would have never left his truck.
Okay, now let's go to the 13th when I was there. 13th. What time did you come home in the morning?
There was a point in the interview where her demeanor totally changed.
Olivia PT.
She started to become somewhat emotional. She seemed more agitated than anything.
I don't remember.
She was really struggling to find the answers to the questions I was asking her.
What time did he get up, you say Saturday?
I don't remember. I'm sorry.
That's fine. So let's,
It gets me confused when I keep going back and forth in time.
I could tell that, there was something there. There was something more than what she was telling me.
I want you to listen to me. I want you to really listen to me really good here. Okay? It's really important for you.
Okay.
You and I both know that you know where he's at, and I need you to tell me that.
I wanted Heidi to tell me the truth so that we could, locate Christopher.
You and I both know that you took his truck out there.
I did earlier in the week when he was drinking to keep him from...
Listen, I'm telling you, I need to know what happened to him.
I don't know, George. I don't.
Yes, you do. Listen to me. I want to help you. Listen. Yes, you do. No, yes, you do. Yes, you do. Now listen to me.
I probably pleaded with Heidi additional 20 to 30 minutes, but she continued. She continued to stick with her story that she had no idea where he was.
I need to know where he's at. You and I both know you know where he's at, Heidi. I just need you to tell me. You and I both know you're not a bad person.
When Heidi made the statement, I'm not a bad person, and became emotional, I felt that she knew more than what she was telling me.
Please, just tell me where he's at. His family's going to want to know. Just
I know.
Tell me where he's at.
In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, she's done something to him.
Just tell me where he's at, Heidi.
What's happening? This is such a nightmare.
I'm so sorry that you got to go through this. And I think he was probably somewhat mean to you. I think he yelled at you. I feel bad for you. I think it's horrible that women like you got to put up with things like that. But right now, Heidi, we got to start doing what's right for me, for you, for everybody, his family. We just need to know where he's at.
At one point, I think I threw out there, if something has happened to him and you know where he is, we just need to find, Chris. At that point, Heidi became emotional.
Heidi, you and I both know that you know where he is.
They will always hate me.
They won't hate you, Heidi.
I just really kind of pressed her and pleaded with her essentially to just tell me the truth.
Heidi, listen to me. We all make mistakes. Trust me. I made mistakes in my life. We've all made mistakes, Heidi. Things happen in life.
But then finally she started opening up. She reiterated to me that Christopher's mind was gone because of the alcohol. He'd been acting strange.
His mind was gone. He didn't know who I was, and he was trying. He was trying. I told you he was trying to see. He was swinging the bat at me. He was trying to hit me, and I kept dodging it. Oh God!
You're doing so good. You're doing good, Heidi. Just continue on, please. You're on such a.
Sorry.
It's okay, Heidi. I believe you.
When Heidi finally started telling what we believed to be the truth, she did seem a little more emotional, a little more upset. But still, I'm thinking, is he alive? Is he hurt?
He was trying. He was trying to kill me.
Okay.
He had totally flipped out on the 13th.
Okay.
So I called my friend and I said, I need protection. And I was hoping when I went back that he would be okay.
I see. Just continue on. I know it's hard. Just
so I had a gun.
I understand.
And it was just protection.
I understand.
Heidi told me that she had a friend that had firearms. You know, that morning she called the friend and asked him if, you know, she could still get that gun.
At that point, I kind of knew something was really wrong here.
They're not gonna hate you, Heidi. Heidi, they know what kind of person he was. Everybody baby girl's gonna hate me.
To find out the multitude of what she did, it was quite shocking to me as an officer.
We just need to know where he's at, Heidi. You and I both know that you know where he is. They're not gonna hate you, Heidi.
So in the morning of January 13th, Heidi tells us she entered her home and Chris was there, and she said he was kind of out of his mind.
He grabbed Libby's ball bat out of her bag and was like trying to swing it at me, so I just ran out the door.
When she left the home to go get the gun, Chris actually dialed 911 and said that his wife had beat him with a table leg.
Hello? You hit me across the head twice, man. Lit me up.
Heidi told me that she drove to a town nearby, retrieved the gun, and then returned back to Antwerp.
She alleges after she walked into the back door, her husband, Chris, gets up and he is completely out of his mind. He doesn't know who she is. He's flailing the bat. She's dodging him.
He just kept coming at me and I knew he was going to bash my head in. And I was just...
She said she's scared to death for her life, and she reaches in her pocket, grabs the gun.
I didn't know the safety was off.
I see.
And I was just trying to scare him, and it went off, and I hit him, and he fell over.
Hearing that from Heidi, I was almost winded. I would have never thought in a million years that this would even happen in our community.
I didn't want him to suffer.
I understand. He was suffering, so you shot him again.
She said the final shot, she stood over him as he laid on the floor, and she shot him the final time.
How many times do you think you shot him?
I don't.
Okay.
If you shoot somebody one time and you're in true fear, and she alleged he went backwards and fell down, he's no longer a threat at that point. She could have picked up the phone and dialed 911 and got him the help that he needed. She didn't have to eliminate his life.
Heidi was telling me that all of this had occurred the same day that I had arrived at the house.
When I was there, had you already killed him? He was already dead. Is that why you were so hesitant to let me in? Obviously.
Well, because he was laying there dead. And I knew you would arrest me right on the spot. And I was flipping the out.
That contradicted what I saw that day on the porch. There was no emotion from her whatsoever to indicate to me that she had just killed someone. Essentially, Christopher was just laying on the other side of the door, deceased. After she'd confessed to shooting Chris, it was really important that I, find out where Christopher's body was.
I wrapped him up in plastic and I took him. I had to muscle him down into the basement and I buried him under cement.
I see.
She laid Chris out flat up against a interior wall, then took cinder blocks and leveled them up like too high, and then got the cement.
Was there already cement down in the basement, or where did you get the cement?
I bought it.
Like in bags, or where did you buy the cement at?
I paid cash for it at Menards. I've done mortar work before, and it was the only thing the ground's frozen. I didn't know what to do. I was freaking out. I'm not a murderer.
I understand.
She said it took her 2 or 3 separate trips to acquire enough cement to entomb him in the basement. And then she also said that she'd hid the firearm at a location in the basement.
The area where this occurred at, did you clean that area, or how did that happen? Or just tell me how did you buy the material?
Blood on the carpet, so I rented a rug doctor. I paid cash for it.
Based off of Heidi's actions and what she told me led me to believe, she's pretty cold. At the conclusion of that interview, she was charged with murder and transported to the Paulding jail.
I was floored. I couldn't believe that she had killed him and put him in the basement. And for her to do that to Chris and put our family through that's really terrible. That's not something a human being does to somebody.
Heidi was adamant that she had killed Chris out of self-defense. She'd claimed due to his illnesses, he's out of his mind, and she never wavered from that.
She said she had to shoot Chris because she was afraid that he was going to kill her. Had a jury believed that Heidi had acted in self-defense, she would be found not guilty.
We just couldn't stop at Heidi telling us that she had shot Chris out of self-defense. We had to continue to investigate. We knew she had been lying to us previous in the interview, and to get those details were so important to find out exactly what did happen in that home.
We obtained a search warrant for Heidi's house, as it's now a crime scene. The forensic agents went in to gather evidence in the upstairs where the crime occurred. The search for Chris's body took us to this concrete tomb. We were able to, dismantle the top of it because there was a piece of wood laying across it. And then that's where we realized that, the concrete was probably approximately maybe a foot deep with his body encased in it. She really did her due diligence with securing him in that and covering it up. You wouldn't have known there was a body there. Down in the basement, underneath the stairwell, were some shelves with boxes. The gun was retrieved from one of them boxes.
Chief Clemens was able to get footage of Heidi as she made multiple visits to gather different things to clean up that scene.
You can leave everything there, but I will need you. Okay.
Heidi appeared to be very jovial. You would not have known that she had just killed her husband that day.
Have you guys gotten good reviews on those? Oh, yeah. People swear by those. Good.
Probably the most shocking thing for me of that footage was when she's at the counter and she has the rug doctor. She looks at the clerk and asks the clerk if they get good reviews on that piece of equipment. Couldn't believe that, her state of mind, she would ask that, knowing what she was about to do.
During the investigation, we had actually taken time to look at Heidi's Facebook, kind of see what's on there. We actually found that during the time that Chris would have been in the basement, she was selling items from her home. People were asked to come to her home to pick up those items.
These were definitely not the actions of a woman in distress. You know, she was just going about her daily life, just normal as could be. This case created a high volume of video footage, surveillance footage, that we obtained from all different sources, but the main one was a business right next door to Heidi's home. When we were looking through the footage, just days after the incident, there's a clip where this red truck is present. Footage was too grainy to show a clear plate number. You could tell by the footage, you know, he was a male, probably in his 40s or 50s, you know, wore glasses.
He is seen in the video helping Heidi, bringing out a freezer, loading that into his red truck.
He places that freezer in his red truck and then drives away with it.
So, of course, it's lots of questions in our mind. And so it was imperative to find out, who is this guy? What role does he play? Through our investigation, we were able to figure out who was in that red truck. His name was Neil Deemer.
I felt it was really important to speak with him and find out, you know, what he knew, if he knew anything at all. He said that him and Heidi had developed a friendship several years back, and that they had always just stayed in contact off and on.
Neil was at the home with Heidi. He thought it was an ex-husband, that he was supposed to be helping, and he was a drunk. He wasn't going to help. While at the home, he was helping her move things around, and one thing was a non-working freezer that she needed rid of because it was just in the way. So Neil actually loaded that into his truck, and he disposed that at his workplace. Neil adamantly denied any knowledge of Chris being murdered in that home.
During the interview, I asked him if him and Heidi had an intimate relationship, and he indicated that they did.
So Neil indicated that before they moved the furniture and disposed of the freezer, that he and Heidi had actually had sex on the living room floor. Listening to Neil tell us that they had had sex right above where Chris was laying, I was absolutely shocked. I'm thinking, what kind of woman are we really dealing with?
I didn't believe this was self-defense for several reasons. Normal person, I would think, would act rationally in a self-defense situation, and she'd have called the police. And the fact that I was there that morning and he was dead on the other side of the door, that would have been her opportunity to tell me, you know, that that's what occurred.
So we continued to investigate to make sure that we could prove this was an absolute murder and not a self-defense case like she was alleging.
It was important that you know, if that did happen, would I find the evidence to prove that Heidi lied. During our search, we were informed that there was a possible witness that was an employee of the Pit Stop gas station that may have seen Chris the morning of the incident. The Pit Stop is probably less than a block away from where Chris's house is. When I spoke with the employee, she indicated that Chris had come in and purchased cigarettes. She said that his shirt was bloody. He had a knot or a black eye, and his face had blood on it. She had asked him if he needed help, and he told her that he was okay and that he'd already called the police.
Hello? Hey, man, my wife should try to kill me.
Based on the 911 records, we was able to determine that Chris must have went to the gas station minutes after making the 911 call. This eyewitness account was very crucial in determining the fact that he had been assaulted by Heidi, and without that witness, we wouldn't know whether or not that truly did happen.
So talking to the gas station attendant really turned things around for us. We knew Heidi wasn't the victim she was alleging she was.
Heidi never wavered from that this was self-defense. But I believe the evidence shows that Heidi Grant contemplated murdering her husband. I think she was tired of the alcoholism. I think she was worried about her reputation in our community. I think when she arrived home in the morning, she struck him with either a ball bat or a table leg. He makes the 911 call.
Hey, man, my wife should try to kill me.
She then left to get the gun. He obviously left and went to the gas station, purchased some items, returned back home. She returns and then shoots him. She shot him 10 times.
That just screams volumes to me of the hate and the rage she must have had for her husband.
She made mention that it was really difficult for her to get him down to the basement all by herself. She has to drag him over to there. When she got him to the top of the stairs, she just shoved him like a sled. She gets him to the bottom of the stairs, and then she has to drag him up where she was going to bury him, and then encased him in a tomb in the basement. As far as the motive, my speculation is she just felt that being in this small community, living with an alcoholic, she didn't want that type of image. And she basically removed Chris from her life, and it wouldn't hurt her family's business.
It's absolutely heartbreaking that the life of a human wasn't as important as her reputation in our small village.
Conclusion of collecting all of the evidence, Heidi was charged and indicted by a county grand jury with aggravated murder. Heidi pled not guilty and was sticking to the story of self-defense. Heidi took the stand during the trial, which is very uncommon for a defendant. She was pleading her case of self-defense to the jury.
There's a lot riding on her testimony. If they truly believed in their mind that she was a victim of this domestic situation, she could walk away. And then there would be no justice for Chris and his loved ones.
I was very confident in the fact that we would get a conviction, but you never know what a jury may or may not believe.
Once the jury came back with a decision, of course you heard weeping from the family that loved Chris, gasps from the family that loved her, and she sat motionless and said nothing.
Heidi Grant's sentence was 15 to life for murder. She got a mandatory 1 year for the use of the firearm.
Heidi was also sentenced to additional 30 months for tampering with evidence, and that all has to be served consecutively. So she will be in jail for a very long time.
When I heard that she'd been found guilty of murder, I was happy about it, but in the same time, sad. It just ruined a lot of lives. I'm glad she didn't get away with it.
It's been about 2 years, and I still look at how my life could have been if none of this would have happened. When Heidi murdered my dad, I not only lost my father, but I also lost her, which she was my stepmom. I considered her like my best friend, and I lost that too.
I miss Chris's laughter. He seemed to laugh a lot. He liked to make people joke, you know. I miss that time that we don't have now. He was a good brother. And I miss him.
She had to choose between Joe or her family.
He was losing control.
That was when he finally went full psycho.
When I looked at him, it wasn't human. It was evil.